Welcome back to the Comfort via Discomfort podcast, where we are creating a mentally healthier world, one open, honest, and vulnerable conversation at a time. I'm your host, Adam Beaumier, and today's episode 27, features a good friend of mine, Omar Hernandez. Omar and I went to Holt International Business School together. We did our master's program there from 2018 to 2020. Whenever you walked into a room and Omar was there, you'd know it right away because he was always smiling and he lit up the room with his smile and his energy. It was always nice to see him around campus. And in this episode, we talk about his experience at Holt, including some of the good times and some of the not so good or some of the dark times that he experienced there, including his time creating a hackathon for the Data Analytics Club in San Francisco. He was working with a nonprofit organization in Venezuela. So it was a really, really cool experience, but he had to dedicate a whole lot of time to do those things. And so his grades were suffering. So he talks about that experience and juggling both of those things at the same time. And then, like a lot of us, when the pandemic hit, things changed a lot. And a lot of us felt lonely. A lot of us felt isolated. A lot of us weren't sure exactly what we were going to do. And for Omar specifically, he was going through a lot. As an international student, upon graduation, you basically have to find a job right away. You have 90 days to find a job, or you essentially get kicked out of the country. And so me being Canadian, I faced that, and so did Omar, and so did a lot of our friends. So he had to find a job within 90 days. The world was completely shutting down, and his 5-year relationship just ended. So he was facing a lot of things all at once. And he went through a period of depression, went through a period where he had a lot of anxiety, where his body literally froze because even though he knew that he needed to do certain things to get a job and to do some interviews and to apply, his body was telling him not to. And so he experienced that for quite a while. And in this episode, he details what that experience was like, including talking about some of the darkest times in that moment. But he also really details how he got himself out of that moment, including going to therapy, listening to a lot of podcasts, learning about how his brain actually processes information and how your body responds to a breakup, and relating that to an actual traumatic event, because going through a breakup can actually be considered a traumatic event. So he talks about a lot of those things. So you're gonna be able to relate a lot to Omar, because he's just so down to earth. He's so relatable, and just like you and me, he faced a lot of struggles when the pandemic hit. So he goes through all of that, and he talks about how he's pulled himself out and how he is now more comfortable putting himself in uncertain and uncomfortable situations, and why some of the things that pulled him out of the rut are things that are going to remain in his life for the foreseeable future. So I really hope you enjoy. You're definitely going to have some takeaways from the conversation with Omar. Like I said, very charismatic, very down to earth, very relatable individual. If you do enjoy the episode, as always, please consider leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on. It would be super, super helpful to support the channel, and I would really, really appreciate it. All right, here we go. All right, welcome back to another episode of the CVD Podcast. I'm here with my friend Omar Hernandez. Omar, welcome to the show.
Adam, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too. I mean, we did our master's program together at Holt in 2018 and 2019 in Boston. But we weren't like super close. Like, we hung out every now and then and saw each other at different events, and we're friendly with each other, of course, but like we weren't like super close. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about you and diving deeper into your story, because I know that you got a lot to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've always been a fan of your ideology of comfort via discomfort, and to be here talking about this with you. It's just, an amazing feeling. So thank you for inviting me, and hopefully we get some really interesting, juicy ideas on how to get comfortable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really excited that you've just you're open to being on the show, because not everybody is willing to share openly and honestly and vulnerably, and so I'm excited that you're here to do that today, because I mean, there's some stuff that we're going to get into, and I'm really looking forward to it. So before we get into the details, why don't you tell me just a little bit more about who Omar is as a person, and then what you do for work, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, so like Adam said, hello everyone. I am Omar. I am originally from Venezuela. I grew up there, but I moved to the US about 10 years ago now. And yeah, it's been a roller coaster of experiences. I moved when I was 18 by myself. So um, the growth that I've had living abroad in a different country, in a different culture, adapting and all of that has been, again, a roller coaster that has led me to live what I think it's a very fulfilling life right now. I live in New York nowadays. I moved about 2 years ago, and that's I think about me generally. I think I'll take a deep dive later, when I'm telling you about some of my hobbies and some of my activities that I participate in. But that's me as a person, and professionally. Like you said, we did a master's of international business together. Then I completed another master's of business analytics, and that's what I work on now in a cybersecurity company. I am a data analyst, basically. And yeah, I'm located in New York.
Nice, nice. And yeah, for anybody that doesn't know Omar, from my experience at Halt, you were one of like the friendliest people that I knew that I knew during our program. And at any point in time, like even at no matter what event that we were at or just walking through the campus, like I'd look over and Omar's just, hanging out with friends and just smiling. Like you were just like that sort of positive guy, and your smile would like light up the room from all the way over there. So you're always like super approachable, and it was always really nice to see you on campus. And Abdul, one of our mutual friends, is the person who like referred you to the podcast, and he was just like, man, Omar's got a heart of gold. He's always been one to like push himself outside of his comfort zone, and he's done some pretty cool things. So like, you got to get him on. And so it's a pleasure to have you here and to dive deeper into your experience. Now, you mentioned growing up in Venezuela and then moving here about 10 years ago. So you want to tell me just a little bit about what your life was like in Venezuela before you moved, and what was it that specifically like brought you to the US? Why did you decide to make that move 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, the capital of Venezuela. I went to school there. I did high school there. I was able to study English throughout my life, so I had a pretty good level of English when I moved to the U.S. I think I'd say I came here because of I'm sure people have heard in the news about situation in Venezuela, like the hyperinflation that there was maybe 5 years ago, or there's been a variety of things that have been happening in Venezuela over the last 20 years. But when it came to affect my life, I never felt like I could have the type of life that I wanted if I stayed there. So for me, one of my goals was always to study in the U.S. And when I was little, my father, he studied English in Boston, and I went to visit him. And when I went to Boston, I really fell in love, and I was maybe 10 or 11. And I fell in love with the city. It was a city of students, for students, a lot of universities, a lot of international people, and I set my goal right then and there. When I graduate high school, I'm going to go to Boston. That was always my north.
I
Um,
had no idea. I had no idea that you visited your dad when you're in Boston. That's a pretty cool connection.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, to look at it from like today's perspective, it was a goal that I had when I was little, and when I was in Venezuela, when I was about to leave, obviously I didn't want to leave. It was tough. I had a girlfriend back then, and I she was insisting on me to stay and to study in Venezuela. But for me, I knew that I wanted to try something else, and it worked out that way. I moved to Boston, and yeah, life happened.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I said, that's a really cool connection that you had there. And so when you first moved here, like what did you do between the time that you moved here from the US to the time that I met you in Halt at Halt in 2018?
Yeah, so I did my undergrad. I was an international student in Boston. I studied business administration and management. Um, yeah, I
Where did you
was
study?
business administration and management.
What?
Where?
Yeah, what school?
Where? In a university called Suffolk University in Boston.
Hmm.
And I was super active in my club activities. It got to a point where I was the president of the Model of United Nations Club. Um, so I was super involved. I've always loved being involved in the communities I'm a part of. Being an active leader in those things. And then I graduated. I worked in a e-commerce company called Wayfair for a year before I realized the amount of data that we were using and that I wanted to become better at analyzing data. So that's when I thought of doing a master's. Holt caught my eye, and I ended up going there. For also because of the international aspect, I've always loved being surrounded by international people and like exchanging cultures and um, yeah. So that's sort of how it all evolved and happened.
Nice. Yeah. And that brought us together in 2018. And for anybody listening that doesn't know Halt International Business School, that's a huge draw for so many different people because like 95% of the student body is international. And so with me being Canadian, like when I was looking for an international program, I found a number of masters in international business. But then when I would look at the brochures or like talk to somebody, it was like, oh, our student body is 15% international. I'm like, then you're not international. Like that means 85% of people are like from here. Like I want the opposite. And so that was a big draw for Halt. And honestly, it doesn't matter where you come from. It seems like everybody that we talked to at Halt loved that aspect about Halt being, and you're pretty much forced to work with people from different cultures because we were, for every semester, essentially, we were put on a different team with where everybody on the team is from a different country. So it's really interesting to do that. And like I said, such a huge draw for so many different people, no matter where they're from.
Yeah, and a huge challenge too, because when you're working with people from different cultures, you communicate different, you have a different work ethic, different goals, also different just life backgrounds. So the masters was different for everyone else, and everyone had different goals with it. So challenging, but the growth and the positive outcome that would come from it was outstanding.
Yeah, no kidding. And so, I mean, the international student body is obviously a huge draw. And at the time, you're looking to get into data analytics. And so, with the dual degree that we had, you could do 1 year of international business and then do the second degree of business analytics. Was there anything else that like really drew you to Halt, or were those like the main things?
Those were the main things. I also was in a very serious relationship. I had a girlfriend. We lived together, and she lived in Boston because she was also doing another program in another university. And the fact that I could stay in Boston, local, for a bit, even though I eventually moved for 6 months to San Francisco to complete the second degree. But most of the time I was in Boston, so that was also a big factor for me.
Yeah, that's always important. So I want to get into like what our experiences were like at Halt, because again, like we were friends, but we weren't super close. So I don't know all of the things that you were involved in, and I know that there were bright sides and dark sides to both of our experiences at Halt. So like, take me through a little bit about like what you remember most about your time
there. Yeah, so in the Masters of International Business, so the first year, the one that where we were together, I had lived in the U.S. for a bit, maybe for 5-6 years, and I knew a bit of the business world and the importance of it. So one of my first things is I spoke to people and I co-founded a networking club. And we were just like focused on networking and reaching out to professionals and bringing them and creating events. And I think that's something that at the time, a lot of the international folks didn't understand that it was eventually going to be important. Some did, obviously, but others were new to this networking, American networking style. Because in their countries it might have worked differently. So that was the first, or like one of the first things I did in Holt. It was a great activity, just to expose yourself. It gave me reasons to connect with so many different people, to bring speakers, to just put myself out there as the liaison, the connector. So that I would say that was a first great thing. Like I said, I always like to take active participation in the communities that I participate in. So that's how it happened, or what happened in the first degree. Then in the second degree, in the business analytics, which was what I wanted to focus on, I spoke with a friend, and we thought of just launching a hackathon, right? This a hackathon, for the people that may not be familiar with it, is an event where basically you bring a problem and people have to create something coding wise. Like they have to code, and they have to code a solution for the problem
in a very short period of time. Usually, like sometimes they're like 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, but it's a very limited time. Some of them are like a weekend thing. I've been to some hackathons where it's like we give you the problem Friday, you present your solution Sunday, yes, and we pick a winner or something like that. But it regardless, exactly, it's a very, very limited time to basically create a solution to whatever problem is presented.
Exactly. Yeah. And we had this idea. We had just moved to San Francisco. My buddy Diego Jimenez, he's also Venezuelan, and we're like, okay, let's create something. We're learning coding languages. We were learning Python, and we were learning SQL and R. But we wanted to create something tangible with all of this knowledge that we were getting in class. And what happened was that we had heard of this NGO organization that was based in San Francisco, called Code for Venezuela. And we just sent them a message. We said, hey, we're a group of like data analysts. We're doing our masters here, and we want to do something. We want to do a hackathon. And they got back to us and they said, Yes, that's awesome. That's perfect for us because we are a group of data engineers and we have a ton of data and we need people to analyze it. So we started talking, and yeah, it fit perfectly for what each group was looking for, and we organized a hackathon at Holt in 2019. Yes, 2019,
Yeah, it was it was a few months
2020.
before the was it like
Right.
January, February 2020, like before the pandemic?
February.
Yeah.
Yes, right before the pandemic.
Oh my goodness.
Right. Yeah. Right before, a couple of weeks before quarantines and everything started.
Can you
Um,
for 1 second? I just like
mhm.
when I think of this now, I'm like, man, that was 3 years ago already.
3 years.
That the pandemic started. It's crazy.
I know. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry.
and,
Yeah.
and,
Go ahead.
and the fact that we worked so hard in organizing this event, and when I think that it could have been canceled had it been a couple of weeks later, um, it would have been devastating. But no, it happened perfectly. Um, yeah, we organized the event. So how what Code for Venezuela does is basically they are tech volunteers, people that work in tech companies and volunteer helping NGOs in Venezuela um, with tech solutions. So basically, you can think of it maybe like a consulting group, or volunteer consulting group that
Mm-hmm.
provide technological tools. Um, and we built the hackathon around an NGO in Venezuela that basically was collecting medical information that the government didn't really uh, make public, and their goal was to spread information um, to about the state of hospitals, if there were blackouts or if they had technological issues or lack of equipment to handle certain diseases. So they had all of this data, but they didn't really know what to do with it. And the hackathon was focused on, okay, let's find something to help them visualize or represent this data to their audience, which were like reporters or other stakeholders that would care about that type of information.
Yeah, and like you said, literally a perfect match. You're a student club at a university, and you're like, we've got a bunch of people that want to do a project, and obviously the if you find something that's real world, it's better than doing like this like kind of case competition or whatever, because there are a million of those. And this company's like, yeah, we need people to do this. Like this would be super helpful. So perfect match. And how long was the hackathon, and how many people attended? How many people participated?
So we did it over a weekend in the campus of Holt in San Francisco, and we got about 100 people participating.
Nice.
We did a mix and match of students and working professionals, and that was a great part of the experience. It was tough. It made it super difficult to recruit these two groups from completely different worlds. When you're a working professional, you sometimes need extra motivation to participate in these things. When you're a student, you have all of the enthusiasm to do it, but you might lack the real world experience to handle this type of situation. But yeah, it worked. It was one of the biggest challenges I've ever had organizing an event of this caliber, um, with so many different stakeholders, so many moving pieces, and also completing the master's degree at the same time.
Oh yeah, that thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that my stress levels were so high back then. There's definitely nights I didn't sleep, not because I was up doing stuff, but because I just the anxiety and stress that just kept me up. The endless list of things that I knew I had to get done. because I had so many people counting on me. Holt had already agreed that, okay, this is going to be the hackathon of this year. And then Code for Venezuela, they were like, okay, we're going to provide this to actual stakeholders. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's make it worth it. Like let's hit it out of the park type of thing. But I mean, it was successful, right?
It was.
And you said your stress level was high, and I think a few weeks ago when we chatted, you were also like, I might be failing exams. I don't even know. Like,
yeah, no, absolutely. I had that feeling of I don't have enough time to study and get this done. And back then, I made the decision of let's focus on get this thing done. It worked out in the end, right? I had all of the support from the professors. They were super nice, and my grades never really were that affected, but the stress was there because I was also new to coding. I had to study a lot. I had to do all of these things that I sometimes felt like I was doing, not fully there. But yeah, it worked out. But in the moment, it was one or the other, and I made the decision of just working on the hackathon. I remember one exam. I was there, and I was just looking at the questions and looking around, and everyone's answering, and I am.
You're like looking around. You're like, please tell me the answers are just going to appear on the wall. Like,
yes, magically, you're going to magically remember something.
Sounds like my economics exam.
Yeah. But yeah, worth it. Absolutely worth it. It was.
Why was it worth it? I was just going to ask if it was worth it. Yeah. And I want to know why.
I think it started. Well, what we built was an experience that was important for a lot of people. A lot of the students that participated in it had tangible projects that they could later put on their resume, and then interview or get jobs through it. We also helped an NGO in Venezuela that needed this type of service or solutions. And then for me personally, it also began my relationship with Code for Venezuela, this NGO, which I've been now part of for 3 years. It started there.
Wow.
And my relationship has evolved. It started with that hackathon, but I've done a variety of different things with them. So it was the beginning of this amazing community as well that I'm now part of.
That is so cool. And how did, like, with it being a successful event and community and project, like with all of these results that you just said, like how did that make you feel after all of it was done? Like after the event was over, how did it make you feel?
The night where it all ended, we all looked at each other, and it was definitely that feeling of exhaustion after, I don't know what I can imagine finishing a marathon is like. Just exhausted but fulfilled. You completed it. Everyone was happy. I think when in these events, nothing really pans out at 100% of what you had planned. For example, the agenda, you would say, okay, 30 minutes for this, 45 minutes for that, and right, yeah, technical issues, delays with presentations. The agenda never really developed as we planned, but it worked out. Everyone was happy. Everyone was excited that it happened. Because it was an activity of so many people participated in, we had the chance to celebrate and enjoy and sort of reap the rewards, right, of doing this incredible thing together.
Yeah, no kidding. Exhausted but fulfilled. I absolutely love the way that you described that. And you also said that it was one of the most challenging things that you've ever done. So what did like that did that do anything for you mentally or emotionally, like over like facing that and overcoming it?
I think it was a big reminder. Part of my process of getting to know myself and getting to know what drives me, it was a big reminder that one of my big drivers is getting people together, building a community and having a goal in mind. And that I realized that during that period of my life because my friends would tell me, I thought it was something normal that everyone had, and my friends would tell me, Omar, you're so good at promoting things and getting people together and doing like group activities. And for me, it just came naturally. And it started to highlight this important thing of my life. And since then, it's been constant. Now that I know that this is important for me, I almost search for it. Right? If I don't have it, I feel like there's something missing. So I use it as a gift, but also as something that nurtures me, right? That makes me feel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really interesting what you just said. Now, if it's not part of your life, you know that there's something, okay, I need to like take a look, check in with myself and maybe realign some things because this is not here right now. It's really interesting that you've mentioned that. So, this experience with the hackathon, just knocked my microphone there. This experience with the hackathon obviously was, like you said, totally worth it, and it taught you a lot, and it helped you to see a project through, and brought a lot of joy and opportunity to a lot of people. And you said that this happened like a couple weeks before the pandemic happened. And now I think it's a perfect transition to move into like what happened when the pandemic did happen, because like literally 2-3 weeks later is when it started. And then a month later, I know there were some changes, some pretty big changes in your life. So do you want to start talking a little bit about that, and then we can kind of dive into the details?
Yeah, of course. So to set the stage of context, right? I was in San Francisco, and San Francisco was the first city that in the U.S. Quarantined, right? Everyone was sent home, and no one. There was a curfew. Almost no one was on the street. So with all of that panic, I just went back home to Boston, where I had lived the previous 7 years. And I had a relationship, like I mentioned earlier. I was in a serious relationship that we were together for 5 years at that time. And then when I moved back with graduation that was happening from the master's and finishing final exams virtually. Now, as an international student, I had 90 days to find a job. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know if you remember, but there were hiring freezes in most companies, everywhere, if not all.
Yeah. And just a quick context, just for anybody that is unaware, for international students, after we graduated from our program, we got work authorization for like a year or a couple of years, depending on your program. And it was like you either find a job within 90 days or you're basically get kicked out of the country. So
exactly,
the pressure's on, and the pandemic just started. There's hiring freezes everywhere. Everything's virtual. Shit's hitting the fan. And yeah, so continue.
Yeah. No, exactly. So that's there. It was one of the most difficult moments in my life, and then something that was there, and I guess there were issues that weren't being worked on, which were in my relationship. It ended up just completely collapsing the relationship, and we broke up as well a month after moving back to Boston. like I mentioned earlier as well, we used to live together. So we separated our things. She moved out. So all of this happened at the same time, and the shock to my body and my mind, it was just undescribable. Right?
Yeah, well, try to describe it to me. What was like? So I mean, like, and I mean, from the hackathon that you just described, like at the end, at middle of February ish, you said that there was so much stress leading up to that, and then you're like, oh, we finally did it. Okay, we're good. And then like a month later, moved back to Boston. All this stuff's happening. So try to take me through a little bit about like what was going through your mind. Were you just kind of like, fuck this, like I don't want to do anything, or were you like, I'm gonna get through this? Where was your mindset
at? Yeah, I had so much stress. I had to basically, what I knew that what I needed to do, but I was incapable of doing it. I needed to be applying to jobs and interviewing with companies every day, basically, and my mind and my body just didn't want that. They just wanted to, do nothing. Basically, I was in a state of just being frozen. I was frozen. I didn't want to do anything that was stressful, and what ended up happening was, because I didn't want to do anything that felt stressful. I would just watch TV, play video games. That was at the very beginning, right? I was trying to escape, and then I also started this new crazy thing that I did that I hated before, which was running. I before that period, I hated running. I couldn't run 5 minutes like ongoing. I had to stop, and because gyms were closed, my only way to work out or to do anything active was just go out and start running, or jogging. So yeah, that's what where I was at. I was depressed. There was a lot of things going on. I had to figure out my life or my future, that I thought I had already figured out, and suddenly it wasn't planned. It wasn't going to happen as I had thought, and I had to, start from scratch, basically.
Yeah, and you started running. You said what, 6 months after the breakup happened? Is that when you started running?
I started maybe a month after the breakup happened, where I would just listen to a podcast. That was my motivator. There was a podcast I loved listening to, and I would only allow myself to listen to that podcast as long as I was running. If I wasn't running, I had to stop. Like if I stopped because I was tired, I had to stop the podcast. I could only get the reward if I was doing the deed, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to motivate yourself to do that. I've done not something exactly the same, but I've done something similar in the past. But before we get into the running and the podcast and everything, when you were feeling like depressed and all of these things were happening at once and you felt frozen, like what did your sort of darkest time look like? Like what were your, I know you said playing video games and watching TV, but what were some of the, were there moments where you were just like crying and like wanted to give up and wanted to do nothing, or what did those days look like? What did that dark time look like?
Yeah, it was a huge sense of just loneliness. Also, another factor that I didn't mention was that for me, going back to Venezuela wasn't an option, right? My family, they live in Europe, and because of the pandemic, they couldn't come to support me or to help me. So I was also alone. A lot of my friendship groups also had left the city because of the pandemic. So I wasn't seeing anyone. I was just by myself. That's why my only distractions were watching TV or playing video games. And yeah, the sense of loneliness that I don't know, darkness, a lot of darkness. But it being alone through that tough period, I think was one of the best things that could have happened. It was tough. It was definitely tough, but it forced me to go within myself to figure things out. So, for example, one of the first things I figured out was that video games weren't working for me.
Yeah.
Like I loved playing video games, but at that moment in time, I said, okay, this is just an escape from all of the things that I should be doing, but it's making me feel worse because every time I played, I either got stressed playing or I remembered that I wasn't doing the 100 things I should be doing.
I was going to ask you about that because you earlier you mentioned like I wanted to do things that weren't stressful, and so I was going to ask, was watching TV and playing video games eventually adding stress because you weren't doing the things that you needed to be doing? So
exactly,
yeah, so it makes perfect sense, 100%.
Yeah.
And so what was there a particular day or a particular experience that like flipped the switch and you were like, I'm done doing this. Like I need to stop playing video games. I need to listen to podcasts and run. Like how did that transition happen?
Yeah, I think over multiple days, the idea just started there. Like, this is not working for me. This is not helping me. This is, yeah, like I would think about it, but then I wouldn't really act on it. And then one day, I think I mentioned to a friend, I told him, no, I'm thinking of selling my PlayStation. And he was like, oh, I'm thinking of buying one. How much are you selling it for? And I sold it for very cheap. I think like $70.
You're like, get out of my house. Like I don't take it. Give me a couple like pieces of pizza or something. Like
right. No, yeah. And then as soon as that happened, the first days were like, okay, I have so much free time. But then I was magically, it felt like magic, right? I was magically given time to do all of these things that were in my head that I wanted to be doing, but I just wasn't putting any time towards them. And yeah, I was given that freedom, and I started doing. I stopped planning or thinking of this amazing life that I wanted to have, and I started doing more. So that was a game changer when I got rid of this obstacle that, or I mean, I have nothing against video games. I respect and I sometimes play as well with my friends, but for me at that moment in time, it just wasn't something that was helping me. It was just blocking growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is it was perfect timing. You're like, I want to sell this, and your friend's like, I want to buy this. But what's interesting, like looking back at it, like I'm thinking, man, you literally, and this is such a metaphor for so many different parts and times in life where you could literally just take the barrier, which was the PlayStation at the time, and literally just throw it out. Like you literally could have just, if you were going to sell it for $70, like the $70 probably wasn't going to make a huge difference at that time. You literally could have just went, bloop. But like we put so many barriers in front of ourselves or like make things seem so difficult when in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, I could have just gotten rid of that.
No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah. So you kind of made the switch to after you get rid of the PlayStation, you started running and listening to podcasts. And what started sort of happening like when you started doing that? Did you think that did you get more motivation to like take more actions, or like what started happening? What were some of the changes that happened during that time?
Yeah, so when I was in San Francisco and I was doing the masters, I was so focused um, on all of the activities that I had going on at the time that I really let myself go. I stopped. I was eating out every day. I was not cooking. I was not eating healthier. Or I I felt I didn't feel good with myself, and that was one of the things that always bugged me. Um, I had self-esteem issues where I didn't feel happy with how I looked or how I felt. So I wanted to get in shape, and having all of this free time now uh, allowed me to just learn how to get in shape. Um, so I started following accounts about working out and fitness and just giving general nutrition advice. And I started basically experimenting with my own body and creating you know this version of myself that I actually felt good with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting that it was like when the gyms closed, Omar started working out. But sometimes that's interesting. But like that's what it took. There were so many things happening, and you're just like, man, I'm just not in a place where I'm happy, and I just need to really actually do something about it. And a few weeks ago, you mentioned that some of these podcasts that you started listening to really helped you to understand a little bit more about your breakup and like what happens to your body after your breakup. Sorry. And I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about it right now.
Yeah. So my so, but at that time, one of my hobbies was to learn about either just the science of happiness, and I learned that through a podcast called The Happiness Lab. And in one episode, they have an episode where they talk about the science of breakups, and they go into the neuroscience of it, and they explain a bit of the neuroscience. And I'm no neuroscientist, so I will explain it very simply. But basically, what they would describe was that the feeling, the sensation of a breakup is in your brain. It seems like there's actual pain. Like if you put a CAT scan of I don't know, you experiencing something painful physically and a CAT scan of you experiencing a breakup, the images seem to match. So uh, there's actual pain happening in your body, even though this is just emotional. And learning that helped me, understand that, okay, I was going through this situation that I didn't feel alone. I felt comforted with that information. And then another part of it is more of the neural pathways, right? So a neural pathway, and again, I might not be explaining this the best way possible, but the way I see it is a neural pathway is basically a path that's generated in the brain that allows you to do an activity or to do an action, right? So if I'm learning piano the first time that I'm playing the keystrokes, that starts a path in my brain, and as I practice more, I strengthen the pathway so that the idea to the action just becomes stronger and faster, and I become better at playing the piano. But related to my breakup, I had all of these associations with, with in being in a relationship where for example, we slept in the same bed. So every night we would say good night, right? So once that wasn't there, I wasn't receiving and I wasn't getting this experience that my brain was used to, and there was something missing at all times. So I had to basically retrain my brain to sleep by myself, or to like all these activities that I was used to do in a relationship. I had to learn how to do it by myself, and I mean that happened to me. That happens to everyone that goes through a breakup. But just learning that neuroscience part of it helped me be more efficient and understand my process. Like not to avoid putting myself in a hard situation, and then to be patient with myself, because I was going through a process that would take time to recover from.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the patience aspect, and I was also going to ask you if this information helped you to be a little bit more gentle on yourself.
Yeah. And well, this goes along with also starting therapy, which also was a big factor. I think before that period, I was very tough on myself. And one of the big things that my therapist taught me was, to treat yourself as if you were your best friend, right? So if your best friend is going through something, what are you going to tell them? And generally, you're going to tell them very positive things. You're going to be supportive. And before that period, I was very tough on myself, and I would be criticizing myself a lot. I was pushing myself to do things that I didn't want to do, or that it didn't feel great, but because just the pressure. And then he literally said, for the next week, be very conscious of what you say to yourself every time you look in the mirror. And I want all of those things to be positive. Mm-hmm. So every time you look at yourself in the mirror, say positive things to yourself. Don't criticize. Yeah. And that just changed. It changed my behavior towards myself, and it cascaded down to having more confidence and to trusting myself into doing or completing things that I thought I would never be capable of, like running or doing other activities. Moving to New York, right? It cascaded into just being more comfortable with putting myself in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. That's I love the way that you've described it, and I love the advice that your therapist gave you. And I learned the exact same thing, but I don't remember if it was from therapy a few years ago or whether it was from some personal growth videos. But it was the exact same thing. And I actually had a call with somebody literally like 3 weeks ago. Somebody who I met on an event. I was running a Comfort via Discomfort event for a group related to HALT. And this person like reached out afterwards, and he was just like, I don't know what's going on. Like, I am not in the place that I want to be in. I'm super, like, I'm unhappy, and I want to push myself and all this stuff. And all of it was like, came back to negative self-talk. And I told him the exact same thing. I said, when you're going through something like that, like, an important question to ask yourself is, if your best friend was going through the exact same thing, would you be saying the same words, right? Like, it's okay to recognize that your best friend is not in the situation that they want to be in, or that you recognize that there's, a misalignment, but you're not going to approach your best friend and talk the way that you do to yourself 90% of the time when shit's hitting the fan. So like, take that as like if the words are the same, then you're sort of like aligned. If they're like drastically different, there needs to be work done to sort of change that. And it all starts with self-talk. So I absolutely love that piece of advice. And you said that it started to like that cascading effect, where once you started to like, you started to learn your process, right? You started to learn more about how your brain and your body responded to a traumatic event like a breakup. You started to understand neuroplasticity, where your brain literally changes based on your actions. You started running and sort of eating more healthily. And so after those things started happening, you mentioned that you kind of became comfortable, like putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. So after you started doing those things, like how did you get from there to like where you are now? Like what were the little things that started happening to kind of keep building that momentum along the way and like positively affect your life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it was all baby steps for sure. Um, just like building from the ground up a building, right? A structure, brick by brick. And each of these activities, each time I would look in the mirror and I would be nice to myself, each time I meditated, each time I ate, healthy food that with nutrients that, that were good for me, it just started building this structure that all those bricks I call for myself acts of love, right? Acts of self love. So all of these acts of self love would basically just give me the confidence to act on the things that I would always dream of doing. So for example, running, I hated running. Like there's no other word for it. I played soccer all of my life, and if I wasn't running behind a ball, I hated running.
I was the
And
same way. Not with soccer, but with the
right,
different sports, I was the same way. Yeah.
right, yeah, I think it's very common, but and I'm sure because you also run, and I'm sure you can connect with this feeling that basically um, you don't know how to do it, so you just hate it. And for me, yeah, that's how it happens. But it's weird because I hated the activity of running, but I always admired people that did it. In Boston, the Boston Marathon is a big deal, and every time I saw it, I was surprised about what these people that I thought were greater than me for some reason were capable of doing. And then once I started running and I started figuring out that what I was capable of, and I started slowly, right, slowly and patiently developing this skill, I started understanding that I was also capable of doing these things that were also incredible. And I became obsessed almost with challenging myself, but not a challenge that was too hard for me to complete and I would fail at, but challenging myself slowly with um, activities that were just a little bit more difficult than what I was capable
Why?
of.
Why was that? Why
Uh,
was that important?
um, yeah, I started seeing how it worked, and I started feeling more comfortable and more confident because I started seeing the effects of it.
Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, like, why was it important that the things that you were doing weren't like way outside, I guess, the comfort zone or way like super challenging? Why was it important
right,
that the activities were challenging, but you could complete them? Why was that? And why was that differentiation important at that time?
right. If they were too difficult, I would just fail at them, and I wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to complete the activity. Um, and I wouldn't advance. I would stay in the same place because there was no growth. I just failed at something that I didn't have the skills for. Um, so yeah, so that's why that was the difference. And one of the examples may be like going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym and you want to lift weights, and you get to a weight that you might want to lift, but it's really heavy, you can't move. you won't be able to move that weight. But if you understand the level where you're at, recognize it, also humble yourself, right? And start slowly building up to that weight. The growth and the growth is better, and you feel confident as you're developing that skill.
Yeah, it's like this balance of like, I want to push myself to challenge myself because I know it's good for me, but I want to do something that is attainable with hard work. It's not like you just do it overnight, but it's something that I know can be attained, right? That way, like you actually see the sort of finish line, quote unquote, right? You see that goal, where that goal is, and you're able to accomplish it. That can still push you outside your comfort zone, but also allow you to actually accomplish that goal and gain that confidence.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Cool.
Exactly.
So you started doing these things, and I know that you said obviously you're a big community builder, and I know that you joined, I think, a running club in Boston, if I remember correctly. So, like, when on your journey did you, like, you've said during this talk already that there are times where when community is not a part of your life, you know that something's missing. So when in this journey did you kind of join that running community, I guess, and what did that do for you?
Right. Yeah. So I think you pointed it out perfectly. This was a period of my life where I felt alone. I didn't feel that sense of community. And I just started reaching out to people that I sort of knew that lived in the city, that were still in the city, but I wasn't too close to. And yeah, I started talking with some friends that were also running at the time, and they actually told me that they were organizing a half marathon by themselves. Like, they were organizing the route, they were going to get the numbers printed out, they were going to get medals. They were doing the whole logistics of this fake half marathon, just for fun. And I wasn't running nowhere near the distance of half marathon back then, but I love the challenge. I love the community, and I wanted to meet more people that were doing it. So we did it, and at that time it started. We created like this running group where we met every Saturday at 6 a.m. and we ran together throughout any season.
This was
sorry,
this was back in 2020 or 2021. When was this?
Yeah, this was towards the end of 2020. While I was still in Boston. And yeah, so running is interesting because it's this very individual, and again, I think you can relate, but it's this very individual activity, but you can do it in a group, and you can feel a lot better when you do it in a group. You feel accompanied with people that are facing the exactly the same challenge as you, and you're not talking. You're everyone's focused on their own thing, but yeah, you're just going through it together. So yeah, so that's what happened. I basically reached out to people, and we created this running group, and then eventually fast forward to a year later in 2021, like October 2021, I moved to New York. And the first thing I did was I joined a running community.
First thing that you did.
Yeah, the week. So I moved like a Wednesday, and the Wednesday after I went to the first session of the running group.
Why was it so important that was like one of the first things that you did?
Well, I thought it was a great way to meet people. I had heard of this group that was also very international, and I was excited that the pictures and the videos looked fun, and running was what got me through the pandemic and this tough situation. and I knew that it had to be part of my life in New York as well. It was a non-negotiable that running had, like, that had to be part of it. So yeah, so I looked for it, and it also gave me, an excuse to meet people and to uh, continue with the growth that I was getting through running.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Both of us are very similar, where we were like, when we were younger, we played sports where we sprinted and that was it. We didn't do track and field and we didn't do any long distance running, because why the hell would we do that? And then now, eventually, like through our adulthood, we're like, yeah, running's a non-negotiable for us. Like, it's something that uh, challenges you. It's something that you can't get better at it in a very short period of time. Like, months, yes, but like, you can't just go from, oh, I can only run 5 kilometers or 5 miles to, oh, I'm running a marathon tomorrow. Like, you can, but you'll go through, like, it'll take you forever. Or there's a very, very, very limited number of people that might be able to do that, but they already have some sort of fitness background of some sort, right? But yeah, so it's slow progress. It's so mental as much as it is physical. And there is such an opportunity to connect with so many other people that are like-minded, that are putting themselves through the same thing. So what else in your life other than running have you come to learn that is like a non-negotiable for you now, in terms of like your mental, physical, emotional health?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Meditation is one of them. Is an important one that I developed through that period of my life. That I sometimes, have this internal debate, because I don't do as much meditation now as I did back then. But you learn to adapt, right? And in that moment in life, I needed it more, and I needed it regularly. And now I don't as much, but I try to as well. And then also, I mentioned earlier therapy, but aside of therapy, I started following this Greek philosophy called Stoicism, which basically, so Stoicism, the definition is really long and complicated to explain, but how I describe it is, it's this ancient Greek philosophy that just helps you center yourself, and get rid of all of this, noise that is around you that can distract you. And you stop comparing yourself as much with other people. You stop wasting time with discussions or situations that are not needed, and you focus on really on yourself, on what you can control, and you leave the rest out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting that those are part of your non-negotiables. And another thing that we have in common is the fact of like, and I think a lot of people our age are learning this, or at least I hear it often, is that like self-care is not like, it's okay to be selfish, right? Like, self-care is a part of being selfish, and it's okay, because literally, if you don't fill up your cup, like, you can't pour into other people's cups. Like, if your health is deteriorating, it doesn't matter how much you love community, you're not going to be able to really contribute that much to it. So like, you've gone through this traumatic breakup and everything, and this crazy situation where you had, like, the pandemic started, everything's closed down, your 5-year relationship ends, and you got to get a job within 90 days or else you leave. So I mean, like, all of these things are happening, and you've gone through all of that, made it out on the other side, and now you're like, yeah, I need to prioritize myself. I need to make sure that these 4 things these are my non-negotiables, and they have to be present. And it's interesting that we have to go through so much sometimes to put those foundation blocks or bricks, like you were talking about earlier, in place. So it's really interesting that you've gone through sort of all of that. Do you do guided meditation or silent meditation?
No, guided. Yeah,
cool.
that's my obsession. Guided meditation and also guided running.
Oh, tell me more. I don't do guided running. What is that?
Yeah, so there's this app called Nike Run Club.
I've downloaded this before, and I think I was going to do this, and then I don't know what happened.
Yeah, so there's this feature in Nike Run Club. It's free, and basically you can select a type of run, and you have Coach Bennett or other coaches that basically just guide you through your run, and let's say you're doing a 5K, and you can select like 5K on a hot day, and he gives you tips and advice on how to run through a hot day or whatever type of run that you're doing that day. But he guides you through centering yourself, and he gives you like running tips, just like check your posture, check your breath, connect with how your feet are landing on the pavement. Yeah, so that one's also a non-negotiable. It's just it makes running more fun and more mindful as well.
Interesting. Nice. I like that. I stopped listening to, I stopped using music or podcasts or anything when I run. And I go back and forth with this often because I'm like, there's so much time that you're running, especially if you're training for anything long distance. So like marathon, for example, some of your runs are like literally 3 hours long or 2.5 hours long. Mm-hmm. So like listening to a podcast would be super helpful then. But my first marathon in Miami, my headphones stopped working 2 minutes into my race. And then I was pissed off for like the rest of the race. Thankfully, Shelby was there and I gave her my headphones because I had to like put them back in the case to like reset them and then put them back in. So she met me at like the 12-mile mark and I was able to do that, but it was not fun. And then she was like, oh, well, why don't you just run without music? And at that time I was like, no, I can't do it. There's no way. And then, and then she challenged me to do it and I started doing it and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of peaceful. Like I actually kind of like this. So I haven't run with headphones in a long time, actually.
Yeah, no, that's a great skill to have for sure. It reminds me of this story that I once heard that Michael Phelps used to do when he first won his first gold medal. Okay. He was already beating all the records and he was expected to win that gold medal. And so training wise, it became sort of boring because he already was doing an amazing time and doing, incredible laps. So what he decided to do was he started to imagine what he would do if things went bad in the race. And so he started imagining and doing practicing what he would do. So what happened was that in the final, he ended up getting water in his goggles as soon as he hit the water. So he had memorized how many strokes and how many, how many breaths he needed to take and everything so that he could do it with his eyes closed. And that's how he got the world record and won the gold medal. By just practicing and preparing for tough situations.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Like you're doing with running without music.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. And I didn't know where you were going with it at first, and then I was like, oh yeah, I remember that he did that, which is incredible. Like under that much pressure and like in that situation, that's definitely incredible. And yeah, like I said, this one came up totally randomly. Like they just stopped working, and I got pissed off, and Shelby was like, all right, well then do it without it. And I was like, so resistant to that change at first, and now I'm like, yeah, it's okay, like it's not a problem, which is such a metaphor for like different things in life. When like change is happening, you can either welcome it or you can try to push it away, but most of the time the change is still going to happen. So it's how you decide on how you want to deal with it.
Yeah, no, and I think we discussed this a few weeks ago when we talked. It's 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 weird because once you get more comfortable with these changes or learning to adapt, whenever there's a new thing that comes up, you also are resistant and reluctant to try to adapt to the new thing. So it doesn't become any easier. You just, I guess, sometimes remember to flow better with it, and it's like that. It's sometimes, it's not always. Sometimes you push back and you're like, no, I want it this way. Or like I mentioned with meditation, like sometimes I'm tough on myself, and I spoke about how I'm like one of my goals and focuses is to be nice to myself, but it also happens, right? So
Yeah.
there's no perfect
Yeah,
way.
no, 100%. That's a good, that's a really good note, because by no means are either of us perfect. And like, we've become more comfortable dealing with change and more comfortable putting ourselves in uncertain situations. But by no means does that mean that it always happens like that. And there are a number of times where, change shows up and I resist the hell out of it because I like the way that things are happening, but the change is happening or has already happened, and it's just a matter of time before I realize it. Sometimes it's a couple days, sometimes it's like a couple months where I don't where between like the point of the change and me actually recognizing it. So like, the idea is not to be perfect. The idea is to be more aware of when changes are happening and aware of the way that you are approaching it from a mindset perspective, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that having that connection to yourself and being conscious. Uh, I think sometimes, and this is, I don't know, a tip, something that works for me. Sometimes when I'm showering, right, I have no distractions. It's just me, and I just ask myself like, "How are you?" And I have that internal chat,
Yeah.
internal check-in, like, "How are you feeling? How are you doing? What emotions do you feel at this time? Um, what's working? What's not working?" Um, but yeah, that's not constant. It's when I remember to do it, but it's a good way for me to check in on myself.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing that you do. And I think it's important for us to check in, whether it's in the shower, in the car, or when we're running. There's got to be some point of checking in with yourself. Ideally it's daily, but I mean, again, like, we forget sometimes. So of course we're not perfect at it. And again, that's not the goal. The point is to just check in with yourself more often moving forward. So that way you can recognize more quickly whether there's like a misalignment or not, right? So that's a great tip. And maybe maybe you already gave this answer in what you just said, but I want to move into sort of wrapping up the episode here, because we've been through so much of your story, and I appreciate you sharing so much of it, and sharing it openly and honestly. Um, and the last question I always ask my guests is like, what piece of advice would you give somebody who feels stuck, or simply like wants more out of life, but is scared to take that first step, or doesn't know exactly what to do next? What would be your one piece of advice for them?
Um, yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think it goes along with a lot of the things that I've mentioned. Um, but what I would tell myself now, right, if I was in that situation, is you're not the only person that has gone through this, and you're not alone. Um, there's a great side, uh, or a great um, learning experience on the other side of this. Um, but you just have to be patient, be good to yourself, and do what you need to do to improve, slowly, but it'll work out in the end, right? If you look at yourself, if you look at your history and your life, um, you've overcome every challenge, and this is one more that you're going to overcome.
I like that. I absolutely love that piece of advice. Omar, thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared today, and again, sharing it openly and honestly, and taking us through the dark periods of time, like after the pandemic with the breakup and everything, and describing how you've got out of it. I mean, you've really taken us through a lot of the details and a lot of the kind of tools that you've used over the last few years. And I know I'm very confident that what you've shared today is going to help somebody else in whatever they're dealing with. So thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for having me. And I loved sharing this with you. It's been great.
All right. Well, stay in touch, my friend.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it and that it inspired you on your journey to living your best life. Now make sure to check out the show notes below for a rundown of today's show with all the important links, such as where to find the guest online and important resources that they may have mentioned. Also make sure to share this episode with a friend or family member and subscribe so you get the notifications when new episodes are released. I absolutely love hearing feedback from you guys, so I encourage you to share a review on the platform you're listening on and let me know what your biggest takeaway was from today's episode. Now it's time to go out and build the life of your dreams one step at a time. And remember, the only way to be comfortable is to be uncomfortable first.